Whenever they're changing my voice, let me go ahead and go through Matthew 15 and 16 in this video. And again, I'll demonstrate self-control. Basically, Christ is asked why his disciples break the tradition of the elders and don't wash their hands. And by not washing their hands. Jesus replied, "And why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and mother, and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death.' But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father or mother is devoted to God, they are not to honor their father or mother with it. Thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition." Okay, so basically they're saying that if they're trying to devote something of theirs, something they have, okay, and they say, we're going to take your sheep, for instance, because it's devoted to God. And they say, but I'm trying to do it the right way. But they're just doing it based on their traditions and human rules. So they're saying, hey, we have a tradition of doing this, and it's empty and shallow, and they're saying, we're going to allocate those resources or your time or whatever it is to their silly human rules and traditions, and they're not actually in the divine order. That's what he's getting at. He says, "You hypocrites, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." Okay? So he says these guys are merely teaching them human rules and traditions, and they're trying to control reproduction and the flow of money and so on and so forth, and they're quote unquote saying that it's quote unquote, they're saying that it's quote unquote devoted to God, but it's really devoted to their mere human traditions, rules, and customs. Jesus then explains that what goes into a man's mouth does not defile him or make him unclean. It is what comes out of it. Peter said, "Explain the parable to us." "Are you so dull?" Jesus asked them. "Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of your heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, and slander." Notice, theft and sexual immorality, cheating me out of my rightful place, and them trying to control reproduction, right? So that's part of what they're guilty of, right? Their guilty is sin. And sin, by the way, is a moon deity, right? Instead of the symbol of the bridegroom in Psalm 19, the sun. "These are what defile a person, but eating with unwashed hands does not defile them." After that, there's the faith of the Canaanite woman, and he says he did not come for the dogs, and she says even the dogs eat the crumbs that come from the master's table, and then she's healed. Her daughter is healed. Her and her daughter to some degree, if I remember correctly. It's not here in my notes, but it's something to that effect. It's not so important. Jesus feeds the 4,000. Again, the bread symbolizes the presence of God. Okay, the fish, right? The fishermen. It symbolizes the people who sacrifice themselves for God, is one way to interpret it. Okay, so the story is symbolic of him feeding the people spiritually, with people willing to die for God and pick up their cross and follow Christ. Okay, so he fed them with the disciples. He fed them with John the Baptist. There's a lot of different ways to describe it, but that's what it's getting at. Okay, now for Matthew 16. They demand a sign, and he says, "None will be given but the sign of Jonah." Jonah. It's interesting how it's a play on words for John Ha. Okay, and there's all kinds of reasons for that. It's a long story. They play a riddle game. It's not so important, so we're just going to keep going. The yeast of the Pharisees' teachings. He warns them against the yeast of the Pharisee. Okay, and notice the yeast for the bread, when you make bread, right? So he says, don't include in the Spirit of God the Pharisees' teachings. Be on your guard for it. Okay, so don't try to listen to them in regards to how you should apply the Spirit, because they're going to mess things up. And the same thing's going on today where they're trying to interfere with my videos and so on and so forth. They're messing things up. Anyway, Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? Simon Peter asked, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Again, so when I say to you people, who would you say that I am? Okay, I'm the top martial artist ever. What does that make me? Okay, I'm not John the Baptist. I'm not Elijah. I'm not Jeremiah or one of the prophets. I'm the top martial artist ever. And Jesus came to bring a sword a symbol of king, a sword, a symbol of devotion and loyalty. The root and offspring of David in single combat. I am Christ. I am the Christos. I am the anointed, set apart by God as the first and the last, the top martial artist ever, the number one, okay, in the spirit of the first, going back to Africa, and in the spirit of God, and I'm the last. And God is speaking through me, and people are trying to interfere, and they're silly for it. Anyway, Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Again, I reject this argument as establishing any worldly church here. There's different ways to interpret that. Okay? It has to do with the idea of somebody accepting Christ. Okay? And that person, you know, that courage it takes to say that, and the trouble that is coming. Okay? And of course, Peter makes a mistake later on. He denies him, and then he corrects his mistake in popular culture and is crucified upside down as the story goes. And ironically, the upside down cross is a symbol of the devil. And when we look at the Catholic Church and the Protestants, which come from the Catholic tree, okay, they worship the devil, right? They twisted what was being said there. It's the Royal African Falcon Top Martial Arts Order, and not the Western deception or any other deception that sprung up from the book, but rather the word that predates the book, the true Spirit of God. Because the kingdom of heaven is not a matter of speech or written word, it's a matter of spiritual power. Jesus predicts his death. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. And he must be killed, and on the third day he be raised to life. If people do not relent, I must be persecuted to the very end. And one way or another, they'll have caused my death. My death will be honorable, no matter how much they seek to defile me. It is not what goes onto the body or into the body that defiles one. It is what comes from the heart. So when we look at your marriages, your marriages are shallow and you're evil. So you have defiled because of that evil, and you refuse to be cleansed with the living water of God from my heart. Okay, from my heart into your obedience is the only way you could be cleansed. And after I'm gone, okay, God made it simple for everyone. After I'm gone, no one could possibly be right with God, and it should be obvious. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Just what he chastised the Pharisees for. He said, you're not supposed to be like the Pharisees. Beware of the yeast. You know, be concerned about serving God. Don't be concerned about mere human rules, customs, and traditions, and the flesh. Don't be from the cult of the flesh and appearances. So he called him Satan. He said, you who seek to stop me from doing what's right, get behind me. Satan, you know, get under my feet. You who don't want me to date your daughters because you don't want their flesh to get hurt, you know, get under my feet. Satan, get out of the way. Your children belong to God first and foremost, not to you. Get out of the way. 24. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. See, again, he says, you must be willing to die. And look at what this world has to offer. I talk about all the things, the child molestation, the starving kids, and so on and so forth. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can you give in exchange for their soul? Again, I tell you, what good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, even the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone exchange for their soul? That's what matters, your soul. Your flesh even sheds to some degree during your lifetime. Your hair changes color. Your body's being worn down. You know, do you put your clothes over your soul too? So why do you put your flesh over your soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. According to what they have done, their deeds. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. There's a lot of applications for this. One is their spirit will not fade because they will be refreshed. The spirit of, will be refreshed. The master will refresh them, and they will refresh the master, so to speak, in Proverbs. There's a lot of interesting applications of that. And what's interesting is they wanted people to reconcile this with what's going on in the world and not to take it literally, but we see the critics of the Bible, and I'm one of the critics of the Bible because God comes before people's interpretation. It's allowed for misinterpretation. We see one of the critics, and they use the Bible as a straw man to criticize someone speaking with divine power and telling the truth about God. And we see them saying, hey, this is wrong because that suggests that the Son of Man will come before their flesh dies, but that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about that these people in the spiritual realm and their expression in the world and things like this, okay, will not sink to death. But when the Son of Man comes, the resurrection, talk about the first death and the second death and people being judged according to their deeds, it all comes together nicely. You know what I'm saying? However, it's a riddle, it's a pain to explain, and so I personally do not like to explain it that way because sometimes I myself get confused, especially when I'm fumed. It's easier for me to tell it my way, but unfortunately people do not take me at my word, and I have to show them in the Bible, and then they go, oh my goodness, it is pointing to him, and then you get lost in the labyrinth and the riddle. Thank you.